Uh, so, what's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazik of Heavy on Patriots, and it is my pleasure to get an opportunity to talk some Patriots football with Randy Mueller. He's a former NFL executive, as well as an executive in other aspects of football. How are you doing today, Randy?
I'm doing great, Brian. It's good to be with you. Always good to talk a little Patriots. I've been beaten up by them over the years enough to where hopefully, we can talk freely about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few franchises that probably have that
Yeah.
story to say over the past 20 years, but maybe there was a little bit of get back that took place the last 2 years. And that actually kind of leads me into my first question about what we're looking at this year. Like so far, so many people in Patriots Nation are kind of down on the lack of moves, especially after, Bill Belichick was just like making it rain last year
Yeah.
for the offseason. But this year, there's actually some questions. People are saying, are the Patriots tanking? Or is that even something that Bill Belichick would ever sign off on?
Well, I would say this: fans need to be a little bit cautious for throwing out even that term, so to speak. I don't think there's really tanking involved in the NFL. I've never been a part of it. I know this: these guys are trying their butts off to win games, and least of all would I ever suspect Bill Belichick of doing the same. So, no, I think they're trying hard. Every year, free agency kind of sets a different course for us. You saw him, like you said, go out and spend money last year like crazy, something they've never done. Um, they don't have that same money available this year. Some of that is because of what they spent last year, but I don't think the talent pool is what it was last year. If you remember last year, we reduced cap around the league by so much that there were never that amount of good players on the street before. And I thought
Yeah.
Bill did a good job of being opportunistic in picking his spots. Those opportunities really aren't there right now. And I think we've seen a lot of big money thrown around the first few days. I wouldn't have anticipated the Patriots entering that prey, so to speak. I think they've always been a value franchise in that they're looking for value. They're looking to find something in any particular player that nobody else sees, and then try to put that person in the right scheme to accentuate the positives. So I don't think they're going to be out to win any press conferences. I think a lot of us saw Bill Belichick and his staff down at University of Georgia this week
Mhm,
taking in the Dogs pro day. Now that'd be a
mhm.
pretty good start if I was looking to make my run defense better, which is kind of what they need to do. I would start at University of Georgia, I'll tell you that. And even with the 21st pick, they're going to get a good player this year. And even for them, I think one that will fit in quite nicely. So I think the Patriots will be involved in free agency, Brian, and not to be too long winded, but when they only have what $10 million available to them, they're going to have to pick their spots. And I think fans need to probably realize that.
Yeah, obviously, fans are generally going to be impatient, don't have all of
Sure.
the information necessarily, and they, like you said, they want a press conference.
Yep.
They want to hear that announcement of a guy that just kind of moves the needle for them mentally. Now, one of the biggest places to move the needle, I would say, in Patriots Nation, is to find that elusive number one wide receiver who you could really argue they haven't had since Randy Moss.
Yeah.
Julian Edelman was the slot guy that was kind of, the best receiver for some years after that, but not that outside guy who commands a double team and changes the way you have to defend. The
Yep.
Patriots have struggled, just quite honestly, to find that. So, what do you believe are the biggest factors in the Patriots' inability to acquire that legitimate number one?
Well, you're dead on in that it's been a long time, right? And they've drafted first round picks. They've spent more capital at wide receiver, I think, than anybody in the league to have less to show for it. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a disconnect with the criteria that they use to evaluate those players. The other thing is the disconnect also comes in that they've signed some good players. I remember Joey Galloway going there. Joey Galloway is a
Yeah.
really good NFL player. He
Mhm.
didn't develop there. He didn't work out there. So there's some disconnect there with develop these guys at receiver as well. And I don't want to say their offense is more complicated than everybody else's, but the scheme matters. The ability to teach and develop players matters. I've always said if we have a player that's talented, and I'm using this as an example, maybe as to why their receivers haven't gone to the next level. The best way to let me just say this: the one thing that's for sure you can't develop if you don't know what you're doing. And
Mhm.
sometimes that system in New England is hard for everybody to learn. So it's
Mhm.
almost like outside of the slot guys that you mentioned and the Wes Welkers of the world who kind of just get open, right, with a little quickness and ability to separate, those other guys, the guys that are split out wide, for the most part, they just haven't developed because I don't think at times they seem very unsure about what they're going to do. And
Yeah.
that's really the best way I can describe the inability to develop. You've got to develop between your ears first. You've got to know the scheme. And for some reason, they haven't been able to identify that over the years. So it's hard to critique, a franchise that has been as successful as them. But I do think you've hit on it. The one area where you could probably pick and choose some failures is at receiver and the guys that they brought in there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the I would say probably the most recent example of that struggle is N'Keal Harry. Took him with the
Mhm.
32nd pick in 2019, and we've all seen the list of players that the Patriots passed on, the DK Metcalfs, the AJ Browns, all of those guys that, have turned out to be so much better or more productive. Do you look at N'Keal Harry and kind of see that struggle that you're mentioning when you watch him?
100%. And I have gone back and looked at tape because I liked him in college. And I thought there
Mhm.
was a lot of skills that would transfer into the NFL. But you just haven't seen that take hold at this level. So I think
Mhm.
he is, you're right, not only most recent, but one of the, ones that I, for some reason, just haven't been able to excel. So whether he goes somewhere else now and does it, I think that will be an indictment on what they're doing. But it's a concern, there's no doubt, and it's probably one that they might just be better off using spare parts and signing spare parts. And they did that last year a little bit with Aguilar and a couple of other receivers that they brought in. But it's hard to develop a number one receiver in a system that, like you said, hasn't done it yet over time. So I think something has to change for sure for them to get more out of that position.
Yeah, and so for the past 20 years, obviously, you can't blame it on the quarterback because
No,
just
that's right.
some guy, some guy who just happens to be the greatest to ever throw a football was the quarterback. But right now, that situation is different. You have
Yeah.
a guy coming into his second season, and Mac Jones got a lot of praise as a rookie. Obviously, I think he was a runner-up for offensive rookie of the year behind Jamar Chase, and I think that was justifiable. But if you kind of had to gauge the potential for Mac Jones, because they're not everybody's on the same page with him. I've heard some people say some different stuff. Where would you put him in relation to the other rookie quarterbacks from the 2021 class? Because Mac Jones landed in the best situation of all of
Mhm.
the rookie quarterbacks. But how do you see him in relation to the rest of the class?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think I would say this, and most of us last year, when those five guys were being mentioned about being drafted, um, all of the experts per se said that Mac would be ready the quickest to play. I don't think that changes now, and maybe this is just me, but to the other side of that coin is he was ready to play. He played really good, especially the first half of the season. But then I just felt a little change in momentum coming down the stretch. And maybe that's just me, but I felt a little change in momentum, which gave me the read that the ceiling is a little lower for Mac, that people started to figure out the Patriots a little bit, that he's not Josh Allen. I mean, the worst thing he can do is be on the same field with Josh Allen, right? Because everybody
Yeah.
knows that's not him. Um, I think in that division, you've got Josh Allen, you got Zach Wilson. There's a lot of people that are questioning Zach Wilson's choice. I think the football people would probably still make that choice again because we see big things for Zach Wilson at the end of the rainbow. I think the big thing with Mac is he does it between his ears, right? We know he's a processor, he's a instinctive guy, he can figure things out. I think the ceiling comes in his physical talents. He's not a big guy. He's not really an athletic guy. The arm is slightly above average, as is the accuracy. So there's some ceiling there, and it's a matter of can his what's between his ears take him to the next level, not necessarily any physical things that are going to take him to the next level. It's really his instincts, his intangibles, and those kind of things. And I still have the same questions I had when he came out last year. So from my money, I would still put him where he got drafted. I would probably rather have those other guys. Maybe if I was going to make a case for one of those guys to drop below Mackey if we were redrafting, it would probably be Trey Lance, because I
Mm,
thought Trey Lance was the furthest away, right?
mm.
For me, he was a year away from being a year away, if that makes any sense. He just
No,
hadn't done it, hadn't had the exposure, hadn't had the college throws. I felt like he was going from the dock of the bay to the Autobahn
yeah,
by going to San Francisco. And I know they traded a lot to go up and get him, but I still see a guy that's a majority of the time still a project. And Mac has never been a project. I think you knew exactly what Mac was. So, if you're asking me to redraft him, I'd probably have Lance at the bottom of those five just because of the amount of learning curve that he has to experience. And Mac, fourth. But with that cap on him, just because of the physical skills that I think are, kind of average for NFL quarterbacks.
yeah. You've forgotten more football than I'm ever going to know, but I actually agree with exactly what you were saying about Mac down the stretch of the season.
Yeah.
I saw what looked like the NFL defenses kind of catching up to
Yeah.
him. And it's like this question: are they catching up to him individually, or are they catching up to the Patriots offense on a collective?
Yeah.
So I don't know if we know that or not, but I know
Right.
that they got to get them some more weapons so that we can find out which one is it. So
Yep. No doubt.
it's a weird thing there. So speaking of talent and physical talent, one of the main things that I've seen is that there are a lot of people criticizing the Patriots' lack of speed on defense, right? Especially at the linebacker position. So it's a
Mhm.
major focal point of critics. You got Rodney Harrison called out the lack of speed on the defense. Even Jared Mayo, the linebackers coach, kind of slash defensive coordinator, however you want to call it, with the Patriots, he even talked about we need to get faster here. How big of a problem do you think that is for the Patriots at this point?
I think it's an issue. I don't know that Bill would agree with us, because I think he feels like, and rightly so, that he can scheme any defense in the box. I
Mhm.
had the luxury of spending a couple years with Nick Saban in Miami when I was the
Okay.
GM and he was the head coach. So I learned from, really, I'll call Bill the master, but Nick's right there with him, right? And I
Right.
felt like he was always in his comfort zone. Nick was, and I think Bill's like this, when he can scheme in the box, run defenses. Where he got nervous was when things got spread out, like in recess, when
Mhm.
people are running all over the place, and he can't really make up for that because he didn't have the speed to keep up. I think
Mhm.
that sometimes happens with New England. They get people that spread them out, especially, and therefore the whole field is at risk. And you
Mhm.
can tell that they don't have the athleticism because they have the smarts, they have the instincts, they have the intangibles, and those kind of guys, even in the secondary. But I agree
Mhm.
with you at linebacker. They've lacked in really a lateral, side to side, just flat out go get them type element to their athleticism. And I think it's something that will catch up to you in this day and age, because let's face it, the game has changed the last 6 or 8 years more than ever, in that it's become a 7-on-7. It's
Mhm.
it's not the hard hitting same NFL that we all grew up watching. So
Mhm.
it is a lot of passing schemes. It is a lot of spread offense. And what I always go back to, I call it recess. There's a lot of recess going on out there where kids are running free all over the place. And that's the thing that has equalized. And you've got to find guys that can run. And I'm not equating, if you can run fast, that you can't be an instinctive and intangible guy. They just got to find a way to identify both and work those guys in, and they haven't. They've had the McCourties and the Phillips and those kind of guys, the high towers, guys that are really smart, but probably could use a little more get up and go to close on things, and to be more of a factor when these games get spread out. Because let's face it, 70% of the games are now third down, and it's about matchups.
Yeah.
And speed and athleticism can make up for a lot of schemes that don't go like you draw it up on the board. So just
Mhm.
changing times, I think, more than anything. But I agree with you on the lack of speed.
Yeah, in what you just outlined when you talked about recess, that would explain why mobile quarterbacks and improvisational quarterbacks
Mm-hmm.
kind of have been a bugaboo for the
Yep.
Patriots defense in the past 10 to 12 years, because that's exactly what they do. They spread it out and they expose the fact that the high towers of the world can't move side to side to keep up. And
Right.
it's exactly why Josh Allen is literally eating the Patriots lunch
Right.
all year because
No,
he's
that's
able
right.
to do that. So I thought that was a fantastic point. I've always thought about this one guy from, a couple decades or a decade or so ago, Levon Kirkland in the middle of a Patriots defense, because that is like exactly what they want, that big physical guy
Right.
in the middle of the defense. And that's totally what he was. So that whole time period's passed now. But speaking of what they're doing this month, so my final question for you. If the Patriots have an available free agent out there right now that you would kind of call like, hey, they need to really be on the phone right now trying to secure this guy, who's that player?
Well, the guy for me until yesterday would have been Miles Jack, because I
Yeah.
think having known Miles Jack as a high school player, I'm a Seattle guy, so he played high school ball here. Watched him at UCLA, evaluated him as a scout when I was with the Chargers. That guy fits exactly everything that you and I have just been speaking about for the
Yeah.
last 10 minutes. He can run, he can hit, he flies all over the field, and in that scheme where they could play him as a weak side stack linebacker where guys don't block him because he's not the biggest guy, he
Mhm.
runs everything down. I mean, 108 tackles last year. That's the kind of skill set I think that's missing for a place like New England. That guy can make up for not being able to scheme every down and can go cover a tight end or even a back on third downs. So they've got to find somebody, and I'm trying to think who else might fit that. I thought Bobby Wagner might be a good fit for them just because I know he'll learn it and figure it out quickly, but I don't know
Mhm.
where he'd figure in on third downs in nickel stuff. He can
Mhm.
maybe cover a back, but he can't run like he once did either. But those a young Bobby Wagner or a Miles Jack or somebody like that can really go. Now it's interesting because we referenced the University of Georgia workout. They have a couple linebackers just like that can
Yes, they do.
fly. Yeah.
Yes, they
And
do.
so again, if Belichick just said, I'm going to draft Georgia guys and you guys have all the rest, their defense would be better if he could get those guys in his own camp. So time will tell, but there's no bones about it. The University of Georgia defenders this year, in fact, they play the same scheme that Nick plays, the same scheme that Bill plays. It would not shock me if a couple of those guys on defense end up in New England this spring when draft comes around.
Yeah, sounds like a sound plan to me. If they're especially if they're trying to increase team speed on defense. Well,
Yeah,
Randy, it was my pleasure speaking with you today, talking Patriots. I'm hoping that we can get an opportunity to do this again. This was great stuff.
I'd love it, Brian. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.